Welcome, welcome, seekers of knowledge. Welcome to another episode of Your Pocket DPO, a privacy podcast with your host, Alexandra Stanford. If you're new to the show, this is the place where you learn about the legal side of data protection. Here you can learn about the latest news and issues in the digital privacy field. Listen to me break down privacy policies in a way that you can understand, answer trivia questions that I pose that will have you thinking, and listen to interviews with various privacy professionals about their opinions and contributions to the privacy and data protection field. Today, I have the honor of interviewing Professor Paolo Balboni, who teaches at ECPC at Maastricht University. He is a qualified lawyer specialized in ICT, privacy, and cybersecurity, and admitted to the Milan Bar and registered at the Amsterdam Bar. He is also the founding partner at ICT Legal Consulting and ICT Cyber Consulting. His main research focuses on cybersecurity, data management, and data protection as a corporate social responsibility, which together can be used to help organizations responsibly further their economic targets and at the same time positively contribute to the development of a fair data-centric society. He has authored the book Data Protection as a Corporate Social Responsibility and is the topic of today's podcast and has published on various topics within the data protection field. And also today, I'm interviewing Ms. Kate Francis, who is a PhD candidate and a certified data protection officer, as well as the head of research, data ethics, and data sustainability at ICT Legal Consulting. Kate's research topics for her PhD include transparency in the European Union legal data protection framework, data protection under the umbrella of sustainability, and GDPR enforcement. Kate is also the co-author with Paolo Balboni on the book Data Protection as a Corporate Social Responsibility. Before we get into the interview, don't forget to click on that follow button and alert bell so that you know when a new episode has been uploaded. Also, follow me on the socials so that you can receive informative posts and short videos regarding issues and latest developments in the data protection field at Your Pocket DPO. Also, tomorrow I am going to be streaming on Twitch. So come hang out with me. I will be doing one of my hobbies, gaming, painting, building Legos while discussing data protection. And you can ask me questions and receive some free legal advice. So my tag is at the biggest nerd 90 on Twitch at 6 p.m. Central Eastern Time. Hi Paolo, hi Kate. Thank you for joining me today to discuss more in depth your recent publication, your book, Data Protection as a Corporate Social Responsibility. I recently attended the EDPS Summit that was part of the celebration of the 20 years of European Data Protection Supervisor. The supervisor, Wojciech Wiewiórowski, stated that the summit was created to analyze the application of the functioning of data protection within the public sphere, as a gateway to achieving a broader reflection in data protection and its functioning. The DPO Argo discussion rotated around the topic how to be a DPO between the rock and a hard place. Many of the panelists suggested ways to creating a soft spot for DPOs, which is the understanding by the controller the importance of data protection in the organization. One of the panelists, Ms. Naira Perez, the data protection officer at Frontex, went further to state that a culture of compliance needs to be created. After meticulously reviewing a book, which outlines the Maastricht University Data Protection as a Corporate Social Responsibility framework, I guess my first question is, do you believe that this framework is a starting point to creating that culture of compliance?
Well, thank you very much, Alexandra. I take the first question to break the ice and then, of course, pass it on to my colleague, Kate. Actually, we want to go beyond compliance. In fact, what we have tried to prove in our research and eventually in the book, and it is reflected also in the Data Protection as a Corporate Social Responsibility framework, we have identify that compliance is not enough, especially in the era of artificial intelligence. Actually, this was already quite clear in 2015-16, where I developed the idea of data protection as a corporate social responsibility, because already back in time, inspired by the former EDPS, Giovanni Buttarelli, he started to introduce in the discussion the concept of ethics and privacy, ethical use of personal data. And he exactly wanted to stimulate a reflection in the society about going beyond compliance and introducing an ethical dimension. And starting from that point, we decided to develop research in the ethical dimension, so the ethical processing of personal data, and then moving towards corporate social responsibility. So I think, to come to your question, that the culture of compliance is developing. I think it is in 2024 way better than in 2018, when the GDPR started to be directly applicable. And I think it's progressing, not just by way of sanctions, but also by way of acknowledgement by organizations that data protection compliance can be seen as an asset. If you invest on privacy, you will have a return on investment. And we also quoted in our study many sources, testimony, just that. So I think to some extent our research will also contribute to develop a culture of compliance, but we want to go beyond, and we want to stimulate a virtuous competition, especially with respect to multinationals, the one processing a very large amount of personal data and dominating the market, that goes beyond compliance and started to play a role in the dimension of corporate social responsibility and more generally the ESG.
So, how do you see the landscape of data protection and corporate social responsibility evolving in the coming years, and what implications might this have for organizations?
Well, Kate, please, one you and one me.
Okay. Well, definitely, we see that originally people really looked at data protection as a compliance question. And now more and more, it's starting to enter into the world of sustainability as well. So when we started our research, there had been some professionals that had already started to look at the potential interaction between CSR, corporate social responsibility, and data protection. But since we started publishing on this topic, there's been a huge explosion. So companies, consultants, researchers as well have been starting to say, we really do need to start looking at data protection under the umbrella of corporate social responsibility and ESG. And something which is really interesting is that also supervisory authorities are starting to get on this train. So in December, actually, the Dutch Data Protection Authority published a document on their website that explained how organizations can include privacy-related information in their annual reports. And even before that, last April, at the Privacy Symposium, which is a great international conference that takes place in Venice every year, the various data protection authorities, including from Kenya, France, and also Italy, confirmed that they are in line with this idea that data protection should also be seen as part of corporate social responsibility. So I really think this is the future. This is the way for organizations to really capitalize on their compliance investments as well, because there are studies that show that the ESG score, which is a very important indicator for investors, can be impacted by up to 30% by data protection and cybersecurity compliance. So it just makes sense now. It was not something that people were thinking before, but it seems to be the future.
Wow, that's interesting, and it is a revolutionary idea indeed. Can you speak to how exactly this perspective, or let's say, how your framework can help achieve this higher ESG score?
Well, I think first and foremost, the ESG score is composed by controls related to environment, controls related to corporate social responsibility, and controls related to corporate governance. And if somebody takes a close look to our framework, which is composed by 5 principles, 25 rules, and 44 auditable controls, you will see that we actually act in all of these dimensions. So I'll give you some example. Environment. We have controls related to minimizing the processing of personal data, leveraging the principle of data minimization, finality, and data deletion, captured in Article 5 of the GDPR, in order to use the least computational capacity possible and therefore to contribute to the diminishing of the emission of CO2. When we look at the dimension of corporate social responsibility, of course, the vast majority of our framework is directed in that perspective. But when you address corporate social responsibility, for example, you need to do a materiality assessment to understand what your stakeholders value. And we also have a specific control on that, where we ask the organization to understand internally and externally what the stakeholders expect the organization to do with respect of privacy, data protection, in terms of having a socially responsible behavior, just to mention one of them. And when we look at corporate governance, then in corporate governance, you also have compliance with the applicable legislation. Of course, here we would look at privacy and data protection legislation, but not just that. In fact, you may appreciate that in our framework, there are connections with other very relevant data-related legislation, like the Data Act. When you look at, for example, Principle 4 and all the data sharing, you may see very clear links to the Data Act, but also the Data Governance Act. When you look, for example, the control of fairness by design, you will, and also the control related to the fundamental right impact assessment, you will see a connection with the AI Act. When you look at the first principle, first rule, first control is integrating data protection by design with data security by design. You will also see connection with cybersecurity legislation, especially the Cyber Resilience Act. So, our framework is addressing all 3 dimensions of ESG, and therefore we think it can meaningfully contribute to increase the ESG score of organizations. But the one thing is very important. This is just a positive effect, because we did not develop this framework in order for organization to increase their ESG score. We developed the framework to effectively protect individuals. That is why we have done this work.
Well, let's dive right into the framework and discuss the first principle, which is to embed data protection, fairness, and security in the design of processes. Now, while reading the principle and all of the rules associated with it, it brought to mind the current situation in the data protection field, which is the disconnect between IT and legal privacy professionals working together to ensure compliance of an organization. At the EDPS Summit, VP of the Commission for Values and Transparency, Viva Yurova, and other panelists stated that cooperation is necessary with not only ICT but other fields. How is its principles and its 5 rules helping to fix this disconnect between legal professionals and the other departments in the organization to ensure that the organization itself is complying with, privacy rules?
Yes, well, I think this is also connected generally to what we were talking about, the move between just pure legal compliance towards sustainability. So in general, we want to create an integrated approach. So Paolo has been a pioneer in this idea of integrating privacy and data security risk assessments. This is really the way that Paolo has found to truly provide true protection to individuals. And that's what we really want to suggest, especially with the first rule, which is about data security by design. Then the other rules in this principle, I'll just bring them up on the screen.
While you bring them up on the screen, I just would like to add a couple of observations. You're very right, Alexander, that the interaction between legal and IT is key. Because if you really want to implement at the process level a data protection compliance framework, you need to have a common language between people with a legal background and people with IT and cybersecurity background. So there needs to be an effort, a multidisciplinary effort, a team effort, in order to make sure that the controls are actually implemented and translated in processes of the organization, IT systems, and so on and so forth. But there is another point that is truly, truly important. We see data protection on the one side, cybersecurity on the other side. They are definitely two sides of the same coin, but sometimes they may even be conflicting. And this is the message that we want to pass by integrated risk assessment. I'll give you an example. The risk assessment that you do with respect to information security and cybersecurity wants to protect the organization, its business continuity as an asset, okay? The risk assessment for privacy is about individuals. So they protect two different things. Better to say, one protects individual, the other protect the business, the organization, okay? So we definitely need to do a risk assessment in an integrated way. If not, for example, you want to protect the confidentiality of the information within your organization. Maybe you're going to develop a DLP, data loss prevention solution. Data loss prevention solution, in a nutshell, are a technological solution that will monitor the traffic within the network of the organization, possibly monitoring employee, processing a lot of personal data. From the cybersecurity and information security perspective, the more you monitor, the better, because you will increase the chances to see anomalies and to detect a possible loss of confidentiality of information. On the privacy and data protection point of view, according to the principle of proportionality, data minimization, necessity, you need to collect the least amount of personal data in order to achieve the purposes with the least intrusive means. So you really need to integrate this risk assessment also in order to provide solutions that are not just effective, for example, from the information security, cybersecurity point of view, but also in line with what is prescribed by the applicable data protection legislation. So this is, in a very nutshell, the core of this control and the message that we want to bring to the outside world. Kate, sorry, I interrupted.
No, thank you, Paolo. That was a great explanation. I think Paolo really captured the essence of this. I just wanted to add that it's actually, Paolo was mentioning processes. So that is the first principle. It's embedding data protection, fairness, and security in the design of processes. And this was the first rule that we identified precisely because you need data security also to facilitate these other rules that we go on to develop, like user empowerment by design. It's impossible to empower someone if their data is not secure. Fairness by design, this is primarily geared towards artificial intelligence, but of course, also there, you need security first. Loyalty by design, that's very much also connected to data security because you need to process data in a way that is compliant with the fiduciary commitment. That means keeping the data secure as well. And then digital solidarity to uphold human rights. We really tried to think a lot about human rights. There's also another rule later on in our framework that is specifically inviting organizations to share data and technologies with humanitarian organizations. Also, of course, security is fundamental if we think about situations like war, where you will need good data security and confidentiality to protect rights.
Right. Now, let's continue on in the framework. As I continued reading to the second principle, it talks about the creation of an effective privacy policy, essentially how to properly communicate with the data subject. As a researcher myself, I have seen or I've researched that there are many issues with how privacy policies are presented today. Data subjects are not reading them, they're too complicated, too complex. So, how did you remedy this communication issue in your second principle?
Okay, Ted, this one I will leave it to you because you are almost a PhD in transparency, so you are the best one to answer the question.
Okay, thank you. So exactly, you're completely right. There are tons of issues when it comes to transparency, and honestly, I don't know if it's possible to completely be transparent ever when we're talking about such complex activities, things that are happening with our data, but we wanted anyway to improve the situation. So one thing which we had identified was necessary to do from the start was to create data protection icons. We started off with a set of high-risk processing icons. So for certain activities like marketing, where it may be invasive for individuals. So we created first this set of high-risk processing icons. How did we identify which processing activities may be high risk? We looked at the Article 29 Working Party guidelines on data protection impact assessments. Then we eliminated those which would be impossible to translate into an icon. We developed quite a robust methodology for creating these icons based on past icon projects. So we looked at every single, we can see them there.
I will just show the icons while you are discussing that from our book.
So we created this methodology looking at all of the past icon projects because we thought, okay, there have been great icons that have been created. Why were those not implemented by many organizations? Why weren't they successful? And so we tried to create the methodology in a way that would allow our icons to become successful. Then we learned about a contest that the Italian Data Protection Authority had organized for creating Article 13 and 14 GDPR information notices. So since we already had this icon working group, two of our stakeholder organizations within the project had helped us create the icons. They had, of course, graphic designers and project managers that implemented our methodology. We thought, okay, let's give it a shot. So we created this set of data protection information notice icons, and they actually won the contest of the Italian Data Protection Authority, which was very great news for us. Thank you. And now many organizations have implemented our icons. Of course, many of our stakeholder organizations have implemented them, but also once in a while we'll come across the privacy policy online with our icons, and that is always very great satisfaction.
These are the other set of icons.
Yes, so we have these two sets of icons that any organization complying with the framework should implement. Really, the process was very detailed, so we thought we need to use soft edges to not scare people. We wanted to make sure that they could also the color could be changed, to fit with the brand and feel, to facilitate adaptation. And of course, now we're working on making them machine readable, which is one of the requirements under the GDPR for icons. That's not necessarily an easy step, but we didn't want to stop there because, of course, icons can contribute to improving understandability, but it's not, the only answer to improving transparency. So we created other rules as well. For example, it's already a best practice to test information notices with your target group. This, course, is not always done in practice. So we created a rule based on the suggestion of the Article 29 Working Party to require any organization adhering to the framework to carry out tests. Of course, then they can decide what kind of test they want to do, but they should test the information notice with their target group to ensure that they're actually able to understand. Because, of course, this also depends on the type of organization. If you have a very large group of potential clients, that might be more challenging. But we encourage organizations to also really make their privacy policy targeted for their consumers. Then we created a new rule for transparency reports. So you're probably familiar with transparency reports. Google, Meta, X publish these kinds of reports. We've seen them from large companies like that for a very long time, but smaller organizations don't usually publish a transparency report. So we took this concept of the transparency report and we said, all organizations, to some extent, should publish a transparency report, which actually showcases what the organization does to protect the information of people. Because in the end, that's what people really care about. Is my data safe, secure, and what do you do when you receive these requests? Who are you really sharing my data with? So that is another important rule we created. And also, we wanted the organizations to be clear about the benefits that they get from processing. So communicating the kind of benefits that the organization gets, and also how individuals benefit from this processing, because that's another thing that's not always clear. Of course, if you're able to understand how an organization is benefiting from the processing of your data, you may be more inclined to provide your data and be less skeptical about the organization. And we really believed that trust is a driving factor here, because being a little bit more transparent than we actually see in practice can really create trust in consumers, which of course is better for the organization in the long term. And that's something which is a thread throughout all of the rules. So we're trying to encourage organizations to do things that will build trust, being more transparent, which will benefit, of course, individuals, but showing organizations that they will also derive a benefit from that.
And when I reviewed your icons and then went to Maastricht University's website, I saw the icons in their privacy policy. And as I read the privacy policy, the information was much easier to grasp. So these icons are definitely beneficial. In 2025, which is next year, the EU Accessibility Act will become enforceable. It aims to improve accessibility to products and services. The EEA requires that products and services are accessible to persons with disability. Did you foresee your icons could help persons with a disability, help them understand their data protection rights?
Well, I think definitely if they are machine readable, can of course interact with the machine, and the machine can be set to prompt and interact with the icons with respect to possible less ability of the user, and come up with sounds or other possibility to make the information statement, the privacy policy, clearer and more understandable. In that respect, I think there is another very important point worth mentioning in Principle 2 on transparency. If we look at Rule 1 and Rule 2, Rule 1 is about providing more transparent and meaningful information before collecting personal data, and a lot of organizations are focused there, and the main studies are focused there. But we want to go one step further, as usual, and we look at Rule 2. And Rule 2 is about informing individuals about processing that are going on and maybe not even more visible to the individual. So think about an application that you use, and when you use that application, you also allow the geolocation of yourself by the organization running the application. And at some point in time, you stop using that application, but you leave it open on your mobile phone, which means that your geolocation will be tracked until you switch off that application. And we think that this is potentially very harmful for individuals, because I think most of the people will simply forget about it. and nevertheless being track and trace and monitored by third parties. So also in that respect, we mandate through our framework that organization will also address this possible issue by, for example, using notification pop-ups or sounds or flashlights or whatever it is possible and available in order to remind individuals of their choice, because I may have chosen to go running on Sunday afternoon, and when I finish the run I forget to switch off the application, and still the application is running for 2-3 days. I didn't even know that, and it would be very nice for the owner of the application to remind me, hey, we are still here, we're still monitoring where you go. This is exactly the level of protection that we want to achieve, is factual protection of individuals, regardless of the fact that I gave my authorization to monitor and to geolocate me while the application is running, because sometimes I forget and still, the processing activity may be lawful, so in compliance with the legislation, but I'm not protected anymore because I'm not conscious anymore of that choice.
Yes. I definitely forget some permissions were left on my apps that are tracking my geolocation, and I will continue to keep this in mind as a researcher, also as a data subject myself. Now, as I continued reading to the third principle outlined in your book that deals with the balancing of profits with actual benefits of the citizens, this is in reference to what you said earlier with the transparency report. Now, isn't the benefit to data subjects the service they are receiving when their data is being processed? Like, what other benefits could there be?
Well, I think if I make it, maybe I just try to explain with a little bit more detail what we are trying to do with this whole principle of balanced profit with the actual benefit for citizens, and then I let you, Kate, expand on that. So we are all aware of the fact that especially large organizations are heavily monetizing personal data. And on the other side, we have users, consumers, data subjects that feel that they don't get enough, okay? And I think probably in the vast majority of the situation, it is actually like this. But a true informed discussion about that, I think, has just started with the pay or consent discussion, of Meta and with respect to the position of the supervisory authority. So we already understood that discussion would be very material for the whole data-driven economy and society. So years ago, when we devised this principle, we wanted to stimulate this discussion. And in order to stimulate the discussion, first you need to clarify the subject matter of the discussion. And in order to clarify the subject matter of the discussion, we have invented the PMB test, the Paolo Balboni test. No, I'm joking. It's the profitable and beneficial test. And the profitable and beneficial test is very easy because, you are a DPO, you know that under the GDPR, you have as a compliance obligation the record of processing activities according to Article 30 of the GDPR, the so-called ROPA. In the ROPA, record of processing activities, you will list all the processing activities, right? Then the exercise that we require the organization to do is to go processing by processing and to check whether the organization profits from that. Let's say it's a profiling activity, so they benefit because they learn more in terms of knowledge of the habits or purchasing habits of an interest of an individual. So there is a profit there, okay? we want them to pinpoint a benefit for the individual. What is the benefit? Is there a benefit? And we want to make sure that there is a benefit, because we want to start an informed discussion on the one side, organization making money or anyway capitalize on processing of personal data in terms of knowledge or other positive, economically valuable things. But on the other side, we also want to let clearly emerge what is, at least in the mind of the organization, the benefit for the individuals. Once we have started to do this kind of, to draw this symmetry, there is a profit, what is the benefit, then we can have an informed discussion whether this is fair or not, whether this is balanced or not. But in order to drive such a big discussion that is going to have a very substantial impact on the data-driven society and economy, we need to define the subject matter. So we want to stimulate that informed debate. So you may have noticed that we say balance profit with benefits. So by balancing, the idea is that, the profit should be adequate in terms of benefit that you give back. Okay, or better to say, the benefit for the individual should be adequate with respect to the profit of an organization. That will be our next step. At this point in time, we just want to draw an equation where if there is a profit, there must be a benefit. In the future, we aim at creating a sort of formula to understand whether this balance is adequate or not. But I think it's very important that everybody understands why we have devised this specific principle, because from there we want to contribute to this very, very important discussion about profit for organization, benefit for individuals. Kate.
Yes, well, I think Paolo explained it very well. The only thing I would add is that when the organization is unable to identify any benefit for individuals, they should stop carrying out this processing activity according to the rule. And then this rule is also functional to what we were discussing about transparency. So this carrying out of the profitable and beneficial test feeds into principle 2 on transparency, rule 3, and being clear about how the organization benefits from processing and providing fair in-kind value to individuals. So we're not saying that you should provide a financial incentive or, give that someone cash. We're not trying to monetize this, but providing some kind of benefit. So that's just something to add to also help make it clear that there are very many interconnections between the different rules. So one rule feeds into another in many cases within the framework.
Yes, and I also see that this can also benefit the principle of the GDPR, which is purpose limitation, because now, especially as I read privacy policies and I try to make things clearer for my audience, for example, you see that organizations, everything, there's a purpose, there's a, and they want your data. So of course, but this, I see this win-win, this, if the data subject doesn't win, then you should stop kind of thing. And this also could help moving forward with all of the new technologies that are coming out, like the AI and, technologies that are there to monitor brainwaves and all these different things, that the riskier the process, I think that the benefit should be equal, should be as beneficial to the data subject. Now, speaking on the AI Act has just been published. Now we're waiting, the clock is ticking for enforcement rules to become applicable. Do you think the current law goes far enough to protect individuals from potential violations of their rights and freedoms? And do you see your framework as kind of a cushion to help things that the AI Act hasn't not targeted, but talked about regarding protecting data subjects' data?
Yeah, to answer this question, I think we need to go back again to Wojciech Wiewiórowski and echo his words at the last CPDP conference in Brussels, where he made it clear that if you want to look for data protection rules with respect to AI, you should still look at the GDPR. Whereas the AI Act is different in scope, is legal instruments to regulate the market. So I think the question should be whether the GDPR rules are adequate in order to truly protect individuals from the massive deployment and development of AI in all the different type and shades. I think already quite some years ago, it was clear that the GDPR is a very important protection instrument for individuals, but it may fall short when it comes down to truly protect individuals, also from this kind of predictive technologies that especially are prone to create discrimination, biases, and so on and so forth. So I think in that respect that our framework can truly play an important role, an important compensation role between the GDPR, the AI Act, and this additional dimension, ethical, socially responsible behavior of organization, to make sure that regardless of the development of technology and regardless of the law as it stands, being the GDPR, being the AI Act, or something that will come in the future, the organization will commit to not harm individual with the data. So this is a very important principle for us. In fact, in September 2023, we had a very big event at Maastricht University where the permanent stakeholders that participate in our research projects, both business stakeholders, intergovernmental stakeholders, but also privacy stakeholders, also representative of supervisory authorities, came to Maastricht. We had a full day of work on data protection as a corporate social responsibility, also with external speakers. And what we did in the night, we went to the Chateau Nercan, which is a castle in Maastricht, where also the treaty for the European Union was signed. And in the cave of the Chateau Nercan, we signed the Digital Pact to signify a common understanding that privacy and cybersecurity should be seen in the dimension of corporate social responsibility. And what we have signed is a very simple statement. I will just summarizing it, but the idea is that a commitment for the organization to do good with the data, or at least to not harm individuals with the data. So you see, Alexandria, now that we are going way beyond the scientific research, we are going way beyond increasing the ESG score. We are trying to create a movement. We are trying to stimulate a responsible processing of personal data that will actually signify this commitment of at least do not harm individuals with the processing of their personal data. And in that respect, I think we are really acting as a safeguard for individuals, regardless of the applicable legislation, regardless of the adequacy of the legislation with respect to the swirling development of technology.
Okay.
I would also add that fairness, for example, is not very enforced by European data protection authorities right now. If we look at GDPR enforcement, I do think that fairness will catch on as something that authorities will start enforcing more, but it's also difficult to enforce because it's somewhat more nebulous than other principles like transparency or lawfulness. And within our framework, in this rule of fairness by design, so the rule is implementing fairness by design, ensuring that fundamental rights to privacy and data protection are upheld when you're designing and developing systems that process personal data. We really went in to define what is fairness by design, how can you be fair when you're developing AI, and we also go further than the AI Act in terms of explaining that you need to carry out a fundamental rights impact assessment or human rights impact assessment for all activities that are involving AI, not only high risk AI system. So this is one place where we do go a bit further.
I would like to now move on to the rest of the framework, which advocates for the publishing of relevant findings based on statistical or anonymized data to improve society, which is the purpose of the framework, to help develop this data-centric society that holds fundamental rights close. Now, data sharing is a topic that has a lot of negativity around it. How does your framework help remove some of that stigma so that data sharing can help other companies, governmental entities, research, and humanitarian efforts?
Well, I think the key is that reading the principle, one can immediately understand that we are pushing organizations to share non-personal data. So the idea is not to share personal data. The idea is to share information. The idea is to share knowledge. So this principle is all centered on the fact that especially large organizations, they process a large amount of personal data. They get a lot of insight on very important topic that if shared with consumers, with business, with the research, with governments, but also with international humanitarian organizations, they can improve our society. I give you a couple of examples. So think about an automotive a car manufacturer, okay, a car manufacturer of autonomous and connected vehicles. They collect a lot of personal data. They have a lot of insights on what is going on inside the car, with the driver, with the passengers, in the environment around the car, pedestrians, and so on and so forth. So very easy. They will collect enough information to understand how to prevent incidents that, according to a recent study published in the US, are, I think, for over 50%, car accidents are created by lack of attention of the individual while driving the car, and even more for connected and automated vehicles, because when you have the assisted driving, then you are even more inclined to do other things. So in this case, sharing that information in an aggregated way with consumers, drivers, or even passengers, to stimulate a reflection on how to behave while your car is almost autonomously driving in order to avoid possible accidents. That will be very important, as well as sharing this type of information with other businesses, other car manufacturers that can, for example, together develop some way to reestablish the attention of the driver, or to make sure that some conducts will not happen within the vehicle. Another very important example, think about banks. Banks they also collect a lot of personal data of individuals, and they can definitely draw some conclusions on behaviors of individuals that will lead them to a default. Okay, so when they borrow money from a bank and they started, to behave in a certain way, then this behavior may lead to the impossibility for them to repay the debt. So this may have a consequence as far as having people killing themselves. So therefore, this is very important. This is not about privacy and data protection. We want to truly protect individuals with respect to all fundamental rights and freedoms. So this is our goal. Again, if a bank can share that information in an aggregated way with their customers, then in this way, customer may be prevented by, or may actually have more awareness about things that they should not do in order to find themselves in that very difficult situation. Whereas if you look at a completely different dimension, like the data sharing with respect to governments, think about, for example, energy companies that have a lot of information about energy consumption. If shared with the governments, it will be possible for governments to better rationalize and use scarce resources. Think about sharing, again, aggregated data systematically in a fair way, according to the FAIR principle of research, with research institutions, like, for example, pharmaceutical company, sharing information with researchers in order to do research on specific diseases and way to prevent and cure those diseases. And last but not least, with the humanitarian organization, think about calamity, flooding, earthquakes. Many organizations have very valuable information about individuals. For example, their last geolocation, their last message on social media, a way to report themselves as safe on social media. Well, in this case, we will talk about personal data, not aggregated data. But, if shared for a common good in that respect, we stimulate that sharing, and we stimulate finding the most adequate legal basis to do so in that respect.
Now, moving on to the last portion of your framework, which advocates for a portion of an organization's revenues to be devoted to awareness campaigns for citizens concerning the data-centric society. So I guess my question is, what type of awareness campaigns should an organization basically donate to or host to comply with this part of the framework?
Yeah, so we really wanted to allow organizations to determine what kind of awareness campaigns they would like to engage in, because it's not appropriate. And of course, the methodologies for doing awareness raising may completely change, right? Today, we have certain platforms. In 5 years, maybe the platforms we use now for these kinds of activities won't exist. So we wanted to try to stay neutral in terms of saying what exactly you need to do. But we invite organizations to, for example, allocate a portion of their revenue to be devoted to awareness campaigns. We don't say you need to allocate 1% of your revenue. It's up to the organization to determine the proportion that they would like to allocate to awareness raising campaigns. But we've already seen some very interesting initiatives. For example, one of our stakeholders gamified cybersecurity. They created a kind of platform where children can learn about cybersecurity by playing a game. This is something which is really interesting. Another one of our stakeholders, for example, created a vehicle with different kinds of stickers on it to combat cyberbullying. But there's really no one right way to engage in these kinds of activities. The important thing is that it's documented that the organization is doing this, that it's actually done, and that it's done on a regular basis. this. So we do emphasize youth a lot because it's important. Of course, they're our future. So young people are more and more online. They're, digital natives, and they may not always be aware as adults may be about risk, but we don't limit it to youth either. We say these awareness raising activities need to take place within the organization, outside of the organization. They should target youth. So a bank may have a different way of doing that than an automotive company, but we really believe that, as in with most things, education is fundamental, because without being aware of how important data protection, cybersecurity are, you will not take the necessary steps to protect yourself. So it's really the basis, and that's why we decided to dedicate an entire principle to this, because we believe it's fundamental. It also brings back to the very first question, I believe, that you asked us about creating a culture of data protection. Also, everyone within the organization needs to be aware about privacy, data protection, and cybersecurity. And that's really what the first rule of this fifth principle is as well: investing to create digital social capital. So using digital tools to create community within the company, also just to, with the aim of having well-being, using technology for good. Really, we're talking about using data and technology for good, for the benefit of people, society, and for, of course, the organization as well, because it needs to benefit them too. But I would say, in a nutshell, that's the awareness raising foreseen under the framework.
Okay.
And I think it's also an active way to give back to the society. This is also what we want to stimulate, and give back not in terms of money, but giving back in terms of stimulating awareness, taking responsibility for the next generations with respect to their privacy and cybersecurity, hygiene and knowledge. So it's really, I think this encapsulates the essence of a socially responsible behavior around data for organizations.
And now for my last question, what advice would you give to a legal privacy professional such as myself who are looking to advocate for greater recognition of data protection as a corporate social responsibility within their respective organization?
Well, we all know that in that respect, we need to be very practical. So the organization will ask what is in for me. And therefore, we wanted also in our research to highlight the potential benefit for an organization to go this extra mile. We started the discussion today about compliance, and I mentioned that there are already multiple studies signifying that there is a return on investment on compliance with privacy and cybersecurity. Now we are advocating for investing even more to have a socially responsible behavior, because there is another return on investment, probably higher than that. And it's about increasing the ESG score of an organization. So we all know that for listed companies, for companies that are, for example, interested in getting funded by private equity funds or that maybe our target company for an acquisition, the ESG score is fundamental. And in our study, in our book, we have provided evidence that by working on your privacy and cybersecurity posture and adding on top of compliance our framework, that will have a significant impact on the ESG score. So at the end of the day, this is what is in it for organizations. Then organizations that are, let's say, less interested in increasing their ESG score, then the other point is nowadays consumers, the society as a whole, is more and more aware of the importance for organization to showcase a responsible behavior. So you have generations like millennials that are specifically looking for sustainable companies in order to buy their product and services over other companies. But in general, you will see more and more requests of sustainability and more requests of showing clear evidence that an organization is sustainable, socially responsible, and so on and so forth. So also in that respect, as Kate mentioned before, to gain more trust, and trust means also more opportunity, more customers, a bigger expansion, that will also be very important for an organization. And last but not least, I think there is also a social responsibility of the management of an organization. So if you are an organization and you are driving your growth based on data, I think you should intrinsically embed in your business model the fact that you should do good with the data, should give also back to the society, or at least you should not harm individual with the processing of their personal data.
Thank you so much, Professor Balboni and Miss Kate Francis. Once again, thank you for joining me today, and I really enjoyed the discussion and having you on my podcast.
Thank you very much, Alexandra.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
And that is the end of my podcast for today. I hope that you learned as much as I did. And as usual, I bid you a good day, a good evening, and a good night. Until next time, bye.